Beneath the sun-drenched acoustics of modern folk lies a quiet, violent conflagration. We often miss the fact that the architecture of this specific song was built for the purpose of burning. At a distance, the track presents a warm cottagecore aesthetic, defined by upbeat acoustic strumming and a soaring choral backdrop. This acoustic facade was designed by Andrew Hozier-Byrne. He organizes the track around a linguistic war between the wood, the lovers of the past, and the fire, the presence of the current lover. The warm sonic profile serves as a distraction, drawing the listener's attention away from the darker academic reality found within the lyrics. While the surface layers suggest a gentle ode to nature, the internal structure functions as a profound declaration of destruction. To understand how this destruction is executed, we must map the metaphor chronologically, examining the lines in the exact order they were written. The foundational blueprint of these lyrics relies on a Sylvan Pyrrhic juxtaposition. Past romances are taxonomized entirely as Sylvan entities, static structures that once provided shelter. The current lover is isolated in the Pyrrhic category, established as a consuming force. This creates a direct contrast between the passive nature of the wood and the active, hungry nature of the fire. By framing the past as a sanctuary, the artist ensures that the fire described later feels like a deliberate, necessary transition. The first verse opens with Sylvan imagery, a branch, willow, and canopy, emphasizing the physical safety of past relationships covering the narrator. Canopy dapple evokes the filtered light of a forest floor. Yet the lyrics introduce the weeping of me, alluding back to the willow. This connection reveals an emotional toll hidden beneath the sheltering tree. The introduction of the sound of the saw signals an abrupt arrival of trauma. Because a tree must biologically know the saw, the lyrics imply these past relationships were doomed from the start. The shelter was an inevitable trap. The pre-chorus marks the moment where passive sheltering shifts into active destruction. The narrator specifically mentions still living roots, heightening the tragedy of the eradication. By subjecting living roots to the flame, the lyrics suggest the past loves were not yet dead before the fire began to consume them. In the second verse, the roar of the fire forces the heart to its feet, changing the emotional posture of the song. This shift is supported by deliberate capitalization in ashes of ash. The uppercase ash refers to the tree species being reduced to powder, linking the botanical metaphor to memory. Describing these ashes as pure as snow recontextualizes the violence as a form of cleanliness. The fire acts as a purifying force, welcomed by the narrator to clear the forest floor of inescapable heartbreak. The final verse moves away from timber and toward the hand of gold. Gold behaves differently than wood in a fire. It does not burn, blacken, or melt in the temperatures generated by a forest blaze. This metallurgical detail proves the current lover is uniquely immune to the devastation she inflicts on the narrator's past. The phrase, licked off the grain, adds a raw, tactile sensuality to the act of destruction. Standing in the center of this fire, the narrator chooses to worship the flame, burning his foundations. He has transitioned from a victim of the saw to a devoted acolyte, fully submitting to the fire of the present relationship. The chorus houses the song's primary linguistic maneuver. The phrase, would that I'd loved, hides a dual meaning. First, would that I is a grammatical expression of deep regret, a lament for what might have been. Second, it refers literally to the would of past lovers established in earlier verses. When the track is performed, the ear cannot distinguish between the two words. The lyrics use this overlap to perform two tasks at once. As the new fire burns, the narrator's devotion incinerates the physical memories of the timber and the weight of the psychological regret simultaneously. Surveying the completed architecture of the song reveals a total transformation. The artist has built a forest out of his own memories, solely to provide kindling for his current lover. This explains the contrast between the musical composition and the textual devastation. The soaring, upbeat tempo communicates the immense psychological relief found in total destruction. We will pause the analysis here, leaving the deeper mechanics beneath this layer for another time. The surface layer of would that I shows that vulnerability moves beyond letting someone in. It is the permission to let them incinerate everything that came before them. Hozier released Wasteland, Baby, an album preoccupied with the looming end of the world. The record reflects a deep historical anxiety, written while the doomsday clock sat at its closest point to midnight in decades. Against that geopolitical dread, Would That I is frequently misread. Its acoustic instrumentation and pastoral imagery often mask its more corrosive intentions. Hozier has composed a clinical study of psychological arson, camouflaged by a cottagecore aesthetic. The narrator operates as a hoarding mechanism. In his telling, past emotional attachments have accumulated into a dense, inescapable physical mass. This track provides the anatomical record of a host seeking a way to neutralize the structural burden of their own history. The track immediately objectifies historical romance. By describing a past lover's hair as the branch of a tree, Hozier reduces the individual to raw timber. What begins as a delicate image, a willow dancing on air, quickly yields to gravity. The tree descends until it smothers the speaker. The dynamic represents a physical burial beneath a suffocating volume of accumulated biological mass. The second couplet compounds this claustrophobia. The narrator is trapped under cotton and calicos, over canopy dapple. Artificial textiles are being layered over the organic past. The narrator is binding his history, effectively shrink-wrapping his own memories. The resulting environment is heavy and static. It is a psychological architecture that has run out of oxygen. These past relationships require exhausting, continuous maintenance. For the narrator, the past is a somatic record of suffocation that must be managed to survive. In the third couplet, the vocabulary shifts, introducing the concept of love in withdrawal. This reclassifies heartbreak as a chemical dependency. It is a state of physiological deficit rather than just a sentiment.
The narrator's weeping operates as an involuntary biological leakage in response to that sudden chemical crash. The sound of the saw enters the song as a statement of mechanical inevitability. Hozier utilizes the saw as an invasive surgical instrument, violently severing the narrator from their own historical matter. There is no consent in this interaction. The tree only knows the saw through localized, catastrophic structural failure. This established the core biomechanical rule. Biological attachment eventually demands mechanical amputation. The environment then undergoes a radical phase change with the arrival of a new entity, the fire. The narrator's heart is shocked out of its stasis by the thermal violence, the roar, of this catalyst. This diagram maps the lyric Ashes of Ash, revealing a secondary breakdown of matter that bypasses traditional recovery. The psychological mass of the narrator's history undergoes systemic destruction, leaving behind only weightless precipitation. The carbon-heavy trauma of previous attachments experiences a sudden thermodynamic conversion, rapidly cooling into something as pure as snow. The confession that they fell in love with the fire long ago establishes a fatalistic pattern. The narrator is addicted to the combustion event itself, the violent cycle of a total systemic reset. In the next verse, the narrator is paralyzed, fixed on the new lover's hand. Describing it as a hand of gold introduces an entirely unburnable elemental catalyst right into the system. Because gold cannot ignite, the new lover remains immune to the thermal destruction they generate. The narrator stands by, watching their historical identity be subjected to irreversible waste. This eradication is contrasted with the blunt, rhythmic simplicity of the song's refrain, "Oh, you're good to me." That repeated phrase operates as a reinforcement loop, where localized sensory feedback momentarily overrides the total loss of the past. The narrator rationalizes his own annihilation because the heat of the present feels more vital than the weight of his history. The final verse depicts the lover as she licked off the grain. This shifts the fire from an environmental hazard to a biological force actively consuming the texture of the narrator's past. It stands in direct contrast to the narrator having handled the wood, the exhausting manual labor of maintaining his own memories. Choosing to worship the flame represents a transition into total religious submission. The narrator actively chooses the agony of incineration over the exhausting labor of carrying his history. This animation illustrates the final couplet and the phonetic collapse of the song's title. The conditional regret of the past, would that I, and the physical burden of that past, wood, fuse into a single combustible unit. But this erasure operates under a specific boundary condition, long as amber of ember glows. This is a hostage condition. The suppression of the narrator's past is entirely dependent on the sustaining half-life of this thermal output. If the fire dies, the heat stops, and the crushing architecture of his regret instantly returns as dead carbon. The song does not end in resolution or healing. It concludes in a state of precarious equilibrium, a survival strategy that relies entirely on sustained destruction. A casual listen to Would That I evokes a pastoral daydream. On social media, it soundtracks a specific cozy aesthetic: road trips, long dresses in the grass, and the comfortable warmth of moving on from a past relationship. Yet Hozier-Byrne uses the traditional folk arrangement to facilitate a process of total wreckage. He is a songwriter preoccupied with how things break down. The song operates as an engine of destruction. It systematically strips away the romantic safety of nature to investigate what remains of the human self once its history is deliberately incinerated. The mechanic for this investigation is a deliberate phonetic collision. The lyrics trap the material noun, a piece of wood chopped from a tree, inside the same sonic space as the subjunctive verb would, the tense of hypothetical scenarios and historical longing. By forcing these two concepts to overlap, the narrator constructs a linguistic trap. To burn the literal wood is to simultaneously dissolve the psychological burden of wishing things were different. This destruction mirrors Jean-Paul Sartre's concept of bad faith. Sartre argued we routinely lie to ourselves, clinging to rigid identities or historical facts about our lives to escape the terrifying pressure of absolute freedom. In the song's logic, wood represents the architecture of this lie. It is the stagnant safety of history, the sheltering canopy of a past relationship that protects the individual but prevents any authentic movement. The word would represents the psychological side of that stagnation. To live in the subjunctive, dwelling on who we would have loved or what would have happened, is to retreat from the responsibility of the present. The flame functions as the conversion of that stagnant history into immediate energy. Fire only exists in the instant it consumes its fuel. It is the physical manifestation of an indifferent, absolute now that leaves no room for the past to persist. Authentic meaning in the song is not found by building stronger shelters. It is found in the active choice to embrace the fire that destroys those shelters. We see the shift from passive material to active choice in the first verse. With the roar of the fire, my heart moves to its feet. The heart assumes a standing posture, signaling a moment of existential agency. The narrator is no longer a static object sheltered by a tree. He is now an active participant in the collapse. This agency leads to a literal material transformation. Like the ashes of ash I saw rise in the heat, settle soft and as pure as snow. The lyrics physically reduce the proper noun ash, the towering historical structure, into lowercase ash, the burnt particulate matter. This acceptance of destruction echoes Friedrich Nietzsche's Amor Fati. It is more than just tolerance of loss. It is a total affirmation of the fire as the only way to clear the psychological slate. The narrator views the resulting void as a purification. The past must be reduced to fine, drifting ash before the individual can be reconstructed. The narrator isolates a single immutable truth. I was fixed on your hand of gold, laying waste to my loving long ago. Gold is distinct because it cannot combust. While the wood burns, the gold remains physically intact. This identifies the only thing that survives the existential fire, the radical choice of the other person in the immediate present. This realization creates a state of total observation. So in awe there I stood as you licked off the grain. This awe is a direct parallel to Kierkegaardian dread, the vertigo one feels when realizing they are entirely responsible for their own existence. To lick off the grain is to erase the wood's unique history. The grain represents the individual fingerprints of the past. Removing it leaves the material smooth and disconnected from its origin. To inhabit the present,
The fire must lay waste to his previous identities. He is choosing to be seen only in the light of the current flame. The narrator fully commits to this transition in the chorus. Though I've handled the wood, I still worship the flame. Here, worship denotes an active existential affirmation. It is the recognition of the fire as the force that keeps the self from retreating back into the safety of the past. Here is the structural pivot. All the wood that I'd loved is long ago. The phonetic fusion of wood and wood makes physical past and psychological regret the same object. Burning the wood incinerates the subjunctive. Losing the shelter means losing what might have been. The lyric leaves the narrator with no linguistic path back to his history. He is physically and phonetically prevented from inhabiting the past, locked instead into the immediate reality of the present. The song concludes with a long, repetitive sequence of wordless vocals that cycle as instruments fade. This loop functions as a musical representation of the eternal return. The act of choosing the present is not a one-time event. It must be repeated indefinitely. A fire requires a continuous supply of fuel to exist. If the narrator stops feeding his personal history into the flames, he slips back into the stagnation of the forest. The repetition in the outro is the constant assertion of will. It is the work of staying awake and choosing the present moment over and over again within an indifferent void. This state requires a total lack of historical identity. The self only exists as the heat generated in the moment of consumption. The architecture of Would That I provides a difficult conclusion. Human meaning is not located in the shelters we build to survive the cold, but in the relentless willingness to watch them burn.